Hi, everyone. In this video I will explain the solvency ratio. The solvency ratio or leverage ratio is a ratio used to measure the extent to which a company's assets are financed with debt. In a broad sense, it is said that the solvency ratio is used to measure a company's ability to pay all its obligations, both short-term and long-term, if the company is dissolved. The objectives and benefits of the solvency ratio are 1. To assess and determine the ability of the company's position regarding obligations to other parties. 2. To assess and determine the company's ability to fulfill its permanent obligations. 3. To assess and determine the balance between asset value, especially fixed assets, and capital. 4. To assess and find out how much of the company's assets are financed by debt. 5. To assess and find out how much company debt affects asset management. 6. To assess and find out or measure what portion of each rupiah of own capital is used as collateral for long-term debt. 7. To assess and find out how much loan funds will be collected immediately there is a certain amount of own capital. The types of solvency ratios are debt to asset ratio, debt to equity ratio, long-term debt to equity ratio, times interest earned and fixed charge coverage. Debt to asset ratio, debt ratio, is a ratio used to measure the comparison between total debt and total assets. In other words, how much of the company's assets are financed by debt or how much debt the company has an effect on asset management. Debt to equity ratio is a ratio used to determine the comparison between total debt and own capital. This ratio is useful for knowing how much of a company's assets are financed from debt. Long-term debt to equity ratio is the ratio between long-term debt and own capital. The aim is to measure how much of each rupiah of own capital is used as collateral for long-term debt. Times interest earned is a ratio to find the number of times interest earned. This ratio also means the company's ability to pay interest costs, the same as the coverage ratio. Fixed charge coverage or fixed charge coverage is a ratio used similar to the times interest earned ratio. It's just that this ratio is used if the company obtains long-term debt or rents assets based on a lease contract.